Good morning. I'm Janet Camarina, Director for the Foundation Center San Francisco, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to today's Meet the Grantmaker program featuring Bay Area arts grantmaking in a time of change as part of the Foundation Center's annual Funding for Arts Special Focus Month. First, a special thank you to the sponsor of our Arts Month in San Francisco, the James Irvine Foundation. And out of curiosity, how many of you are new to the Foundation Center? Is anybody here for the first time? Few of you. Well, just some background. Our mission is to strengthen the nonprofit sector by advancing knowledge about U.S. philanthropy, as well as philanthropy worldwide. And you can learn more about us at www.foundationcenter.org. Arts Month continues beyond this morning's program. You can come back this afternoon for a look at how arts organizations are using technology to build community. We're offering this in partnership with the Emerging Arts Professionals Bay Area group here from 2 to 4 p.m. We also have a program coming up next week called Taglines That Tell, creating a tagline that sends a message, which is being offered on October 25th from 10 to noon. And we have a webinar featuring national arts funding trends on October 28th from 10 to 11 a.m. And I also want to mention we have our full-service library upstairs in Suite 606 that's chock full of resources to help you identify the right funding partners. So I hope you'll drop by during our business hours or pick up a flyer to learn more about us out at the registration table. The logistics for this morning's program are you should have picked up a handout of the speaker biographies, and I invite you to look at it to get to know our panelists a bit better. In the interest of time, I won't be reading the bios, so I hope you've been looking at that. We will take questions after our panel discussion, so please hold your questions until we open it up for that Q&A period. As you may have noticed, we are video recording the program, and we're actually streaming it live for the benefit of those who can't attend and can't be here this morning. So when you ask the question, we will ask you to step up to the mic and line up here so that it's picked up by the audio feed. And for those of you with smartphones, feel free to tweet about this event. Our hashtag is FCArts, and it's posted on the columns here. And to refer your colleagues to this recording later, or just remembered what happened here a few days from now, just visit our new website at www.grantspace.org, where we have a handy archive of our audio and video recordings of this kind of program. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce this morning's panel. Starting from the opposite end of the table from me, we have Jessamine Chin, Philanthropy Program Manager for Corporate Social Responsibility at Adobe Systems. And we have Renee Hayes, Associate Director of Grants for the Arts. In the middle of the table is John McGuirk, Program Director for the Performing Arts at the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Francis Phillips, Program Director for the Arts at the Walter and Elise Haas Fund. And Tere Romo, Program Officer for Arts and Culture at the San Francisco Foundation. Please help me in welcoming this morning's panel. Well, as you heard me say at the beginning, the theme of this morning's panel is Bay Area arts grantmaking in a time of change. And as we all know, economic forces often are shaping the changes we're seeing. But increasingly in the arts, we've seen staff and leadership transitions that are impacting different foundations as well. And those may be very top of mind internally inside some foundations, but often those of us on the outside are kind of landing in temporarily just to check out the guidelines, but we don't really have a sense of the history or the path the foundation has walked to get to where they are today. So my first question gives our panelists a chance to reflect on the forces shaping change inside their institutions and give us a glimpse of how they've arrived at the strategies they've arrived at this point, and any background that would be helpful to know before we get into the chapter and verse of how exactly to apply to their foundations. So I am just going to go in order and start with Tere, which actually is a great place to start because she's a new face to many of us. So welcome.
And I'm happy to see you all here. I did want to ask first, how many of you have applied support to the San Francisco Foundation? Okay, well great. So some of this information is going to be a little bit redundant, so hopefully there will be some new information for you. We're a community foundation, and I'm not sure how many of you know what that means, but it was started in 1947, and it's a community of people that got together together that basically said we would like to, in a sense, help the community, and by doing it in terms of pooling their resources, money, and then being able to designate where those funds go. Some of the designations are for specific organizations, and some of the designations are for specific causes. We don't just fund the arts and culture, even though that's one of our 5 component areas. We also fund community health, community development, environment, and education. So we're one of 5 components within the foundation itself. I will tell you that about 85% of it goes out in designated funds, which means that those are funds that are set up by trust or by individuals who are still alive that, like I said earlier, have already designated whether they want to go to a specific organization, sometimes a very specific amount. Other times it's a specific cause, like the environment, and then we get to choose at the foundation which organization will get those funds. The rest of the funds cover administration, and then we also do have a pool of money that we use for our responsive cycle, which is probably where most of you have come to us in the past. And that responsive cycle is really where we get a chance to be proactive about our funding. And that's where we actually have grantees that, applicants that come to us, and we make our grants out of those pots of money that is that last 15%. So I'm not going to go into specifics about it, but I will say a little bit in terms of the history that the Community Foundation has changed over the years because the community has changed. And we also fund 5 Bay Area counties, so we're not just San Francisco, we also do Marin, Contra Costa, San Mateo, Alameda. So all of those counties are taken into consideration for all our program areas. And just as the Bay Area has changed, the demographics have changed, the economic situation has really also, in a sense, heightened the fact that there are changes even in the persons that live here in their economic needs. So all of that has obviously impacted our giving. And so we are being very proactive in the last 2 to 3 years to try to get ahead of that, or at least help in some ways. So the trustees about 2 years ago decided to initiate a priority funding category. And that was by, right now, invitation only. And it was really to look at how the foundation could pool some money from all the different 5 categories and get ahead of trying to help out with home foreclosure help, helping organizations that did regional-wide assistance with job retention, helping food banks. So all of those kind of basic needs were going to be served. And then also within that, a nonprofit transition fund that would help organizations to look at how could they consolidate maybe back office activities, look at mergers, and then if nothing else, help them with dissolving. So those are some of the things that we have done in our more recent history to sort of get ahead of the situation economically. And I'll leave it at that because that's sort of where we are right now in terms of our history.
Thanks, Tere. I just have one follow-up because you brought up the dichotomy that exists in community foundations about designated dollars versus discretionary dollars. And since such a high percentage is designated, we often get questions from our audiences about how they can access those dollars because, as you mentioned, not all of them are earmarked for a specific organization. So there's some connecting going on within the walls of the foundation. So what advice would you give for our audience to access those dollars?
That's always a tricky question because as a
I'm good at this.
well, no, I know, that's fine. And this is good because it does come up. I've had this question asked, in our one-to-one meetings with potential applicants. As a community foundation, the donors that give those funds and say, I want to go to these specific, like I said, causes or organizations, a lot of times we sort of have to walk the line of saying, we want to honor that because that's why they come to us, and we want to make sure that people don't feel like if I go to the San Francisco Foundation, I'm going to be talked out of whatever I really want to do in leaving my funds there, so that I better just set up my own family foundation, which is always a great option as well. But I think that in terms of the way we approach it is, right now we are, as part of our strategic plan, are looking internally to see how effective are we as a community foundation, not only internally but also externally. So we're looking inside first. And one of the things that we did do was beef up the philanthropic services department to look at having a person that will connect with every donor that we have, or a descendant, because some of these trusts were set up in the early 40s, and so the actual person who set it up, who was alive at the time, is no longer with us, but maybe they designated a family member to continue, or maybe have advisors, so that we can have that first line connection with each donor, and then at that time be proactive about asking them, would you consider, as part of your giving, consider giving outside of what you're already designating? And if so, what are your interest areas? And once we collect all of that, which will take us at least a year or two, because we do have that many donors and it's donor advised funds, then we are going to be more proactive about putting things in front of those donors who have expressed that interest, because we feel that that way it's not, like I said, threatening, or it won't be uncomfortable, to be able to do that. Currently, if someone does come to us and say, I'm already giving in this area, but you know what, I really want the arts to be part of it because I don't know who to give it to. Can you give me some recommendations? I already have some of those requests, and they, most part, are very specific. I want to do youth arts in Alameda, and then we'll give them a list of organizations that we have already vetted, that we've been supporting for very many years, and then let them do the choosing. Sometimes they'll say, well, who do you recommend? And then we'll look and give recommendations. But other
So
times,
when they come to you, it's not the donor advisor that makes the recommendations, it's the program officer.
in the cases where they allow us to do that, if they don't know because it's a new area, sometimes they'll just say, I want to fund now in the arts and culture, and it doesn't matter to me where it goes, then I'll put that into the general responsive, so that I have more money to give out as part of our general responsive grant process.
Great, thanks for that insight. Francis?
Okay. Well, we have a different tax status from today. The Walter and Elise Haas Fund is a family foundation, and I will quickly tell you the genealogy and apologize to those of you who know it, but I get lots of applications that are really meant for the Evelyn and Walter Haas Jr. Fund, so that's why I'm telling you. Elise Haas was the niece of Levi Strauss, who had no direct heirs. Walter, her husband, is the person who made it a very large international corporation. And they had 3 children, Walter, Peter, and Rhoda. And Walter and his wife, Evelyn, founded the Evelyn and Walter Haas Jr. Fund. Peter and Mimi created the Mimi and Peter Haas Fund, and Rhoda and Richard created the former Richard and Rhoda Goldman Fund, which is now closed and divided its assets among the next generation's foundations. But is continuing the Goldman Environmental Prize in the parent's name. So that's just a little genealogy. Each of those foundations has a particular interest. And our foundation, when Elise Haas passed away, she divided her estate equally among the 3 children to create foundations and the Walter and Elise Haas Fund. So there is this kind of deeply ingrained tradition of passing the responsibility on from one generation to the next. Our trustees are currently 4 grandchildren of Walter and Elise Haas and 2 great-grandchildren. And one of the great-grandchildren is our current board chair. And it's very even, it's like 2 per family branch, all direct heirs, no wives, it's very, very much about sustaining the family line, which is an interesting part of the foundation. And when Walter and Elise were alive, they had many, many interests, and they were very different from one another. Elise Haas loved the arts. She was a sculptor. She listened to opera. She was the first woman to chair a major art museum board. She was on the board of the San Francisco Symphony. She bought Ansel Adams a camera. She had Diego Rivera come over to the house to paint the children. That was her passion. Walter liked baseball, government. So out of that, when I first arrived at the fund, we had 11 grant-making areas that came out of the sort of legacy of the direct giving of Walter and Elise Haas. So when we had a change in executive director, and the wonderful Bruce Severs became the wonderful Pam David, we went through a planning process to reconsider what we did. And all the trustees sort of looked at the legacy of the great-grandparents and their own interests, and we narrowed our focus to 4 primary grant-making areas, which were the arts, in honor of Elise's passion for them, public education, because they had always believed in opportunity for all and more equitable opportunity, economic security, which had primarily been about job training and job development, and now includes some foreclosure counseling and assistance to people to hold on to assets, and Jewish life. So those are our four primary grant-making areas. They have not really changed. I'll talk about it a little bit more in the next question, but just one thing that, a couple of things that happened in the economic downturn, or following the economic downturn. As is true at most foundations, we had a category called Other that was primarily a sort of President's Fund and cross-program area fund. And that was cut pretty dramatically to create a safety net initiative. And the fund now awards $1 million in general operating support to food banks, domestic violence shelters, and other organizations upon whom there were greater demands because of the economic downturn. And that fund is continuing to 2014, and then we'll kind of look at whether or not the trustees want to continue it into the future. The other thing that was reduced at that moment in time was our capital giving. It was cut to about 25% of what it used to be. The program grant making was kind of sustained as it was, and then in the 2 subsequent years, the program grant making areas have been cut a little bit, but there has been a desire to try to hold on to them as much as possible. So that's kind of where we are.
Thanks, Frances. John, give us a glimpse of Hewlett, past, present, and future. 3 minutes or less.
Good morning. Thanks, Janet. Hewlett Foundation was created in 1967 by William and Flora Hewlett. William Hewlett was also the founder of Hewlett-Packard Company. The foundation, you've heard from 3 different types of foundations. So a community foundation, a family foundation. Hewlett is a private foundation. And much like 501c3, there's all these different IRS classifications that we all sort of have to wiggle into, and it determines who's on our board and how to give away our money. But at Hewlett, there are 12 board members, and 4 of them are family members. So William and Flora have passed away, but their son Walter is chairman of the board. His 2 sisters are also board members, and then they have a rotating chair for the 3rd generation grandchildren that are also members of the foundation. Hewlett gives internationally about $350 million a year. We have 5 primary programs: global development and population, environment, education, philanthropy and special projects, and then our regional program is the performing arts. The performing arts was one of the first priorities when the foundation was created in 1967. The first 3 grants awarded by the foundation were to the symphony, the opera, and KQED. All out of the founder's interests and personal involvement with those institutions, and we have maintained our ongoing support of those institutions for the past 45 years. Hewlett's legacy is multi-year general operating support to a broad constellation of Bay Area performing arts organizations. We'll talk a little bit more in some later questions about how we divide up the priorities and identify arts organizations for funding.
My turn. Your turn, Renee. So let me ask, how many of you are associated with organizations based in San Francisco? Great. And how many of you have applied to Grants for the Arts? Okay. So Grants for the Arts is a municipal funder. And so I don't take up too much time, what I'm going to do is read you a very quick story. So you can sit back and pretend that you're eating cookies and milk. Snuggle up. Mayor George Christopher had been in office only a month in 1956 when he introduced his plan to increase the city's coffers and promote tourism by tacking a 5% tax to hotel bills. Opposition was swift and intense. Hotel and business owners, labor leaders, the Chamber of Commerce, and the Convention and Visitors Bureau branded the tax unfair, inhospitable, short-sighted. The legislation was speedily killed by the Board of Supervisors Finance Committee. But Christopher was determined. He reintroduced the plan several more times over the next 4 years without success. Finally, after his re-election in 1960, he drafted a new hotel tax ordinance that was rewritten over and over, trying to satisfy critics and ensure passage by the supervisors. This time he had something new. Funds would go not only to promotional and tourism organizations, and at this point the city had about $250,000 that they were giving to promote the city, but funds would also go to the arts. So, on April 17, 1961, after lowering the hotel tax rate from Christopher's 5% to 3%, supervisors narrowly passed the legislation. The money would be collected quarterly, deposited into a new hotel tax fund, and anything left at fiscal year end would go into the city's general fund. An early draft provision that called for dispersing tax money for the advancement of cultural and fine arts was deleted and replaced with for publicity and advertising. A switch that left the fund's use undefined, generating debate that still surfaces occasionally. In fact, Grants for the Arts original and official name is the Publicity and Advertising Fund. So Grants for the Arts defines its mission as promoting the city by supporting the arts to bridge the gap between arts and promotion and maintain the nexus with the source of the funds, which is hotels and tourism. So San Francisco's hotel tax brought in $1.1 million from its first year. They awarded about $500,000 mostly to the opera, the symphony, and some smaller cultural groups. And now, the last year, the hotel tax fund brought in about $212 million. The hotel tax is up to 14%. Grants for the Arts gets about 8% of that. No, it did get about 8% of that. Because more has been siphoned off into the general fund, we now get 5% of that. So after growing through the 1980s, dipping after the Loma Prieta earthquake in 1989, bumping up in the 90s, then the tax revenue slipped again as the dot-com bubble burst. Then it slipped again after 9/11. At one point in 2000, we distributed about $12.2 million to 217 arts organizations. Grants for the Arts did. Fast forward 11 years, 2011, we've slumped to $8.8 million, distributed to 213 groups. Now, I got to say really quickly, it's important to note that the city last year had a $400 million deficit. And despite that, the supervisors and the mayor decided that they would that they would keep us flat, which in this economy is really a triumph. We have goals for organizations. I'll talk about that later. But I will say also that unlike when the fund first started, right now, 70% of the funds go to small and mid-sized organizations, and 30% go to the larger, the big six organizations, opera, symphony, ACT, etc. So in the conclusion, despite roller coaster allocations, Grants for the Arts continues to be one of the oldest. We just turned 50 this year, and most successful departments that distributes hotel tax. Happy anniversary.
Thank you.
And thanks for that overview. Jessamine, tell us about Adobe.
So Jet, thanks for inviting me. So I think we continue the trend of changing foundations. And I'm probably the youngest one. Is that better? Yeah, I'm probably the youngest one, so they've been celebrating their 50th. And the Adobe Foundation was started in 2007. So even though Adobe, the company, had a history of giving, it was in 2007 that the executive leadership decided to bring the Grantmaking in-house and establish its own foundation. So we have a flagship program called the Adobe Youth Voices Program, and that's where we empower youth to express themselves using multimedia tools. And then we also have two traditional grant-making programs that focus on youth services defined as basic human needs for children, as well as arts and creativity. And for these programs, since our funding comes from Adobe, the company, we direct and prioritize funding where Adobe has large offices. So this means that our programs are international, and currently we have 5 that are domestic and the rest are abroad.
I'll let you keep going where you left off with the second question, which is to get more specific about your current portfolios for the arts, telling us what your current grant-making priorities and eligibility guidelines are as they pertain to Bay Area arts groups, including specific regions you support, and what you project your grant-making budget size for the arts will total for the current year, and in brief, what the procedures are for those seeking support from your institution, and if there's any deadlines or announcements you want to make while you're here.
All right, I'll try to remember all this questions. You can remind me.
No, you have to do that.
So for arts and creativity, we're actually we're a smaller foundation in comparison to my peers up here on the panel. So we're looking at about a $1.2 million budget for next year. Because we're a smaller foundation, we do invitation only. We have a review committee of Adobe employees that are engaged in the grant-making process. We count on them and their expertise within their areas within the company to identify organizations worldwide that may be a good fit within our focus area. And to talk more specifically about that, we define arts and creativity as organizations that are using art and design as a tool for social innovation. So we see that there's a way to go beyond just creating art for the sake of art, but there's no problem with that. But for us, we feel like to be more in line with the culture of Adobe and to integrate technology, which is the bloodline of the foundation, that we see that there's an intersection between the arts, technology, design, and social impact. Let's see. For us, we have one round for grant applications, so it is not ongoing, and because it's invitation only, it's a pretty limited process. But overall, the foundation is open to meeting and hearing about other initiatives and programs, and really trying to expand our grant-making program since it is so young and not as established as other ones. Did I get them all?
I think so, because you said there's no upcoming deadlines. You do it once a year, and it's by invitation, and when is that?
Right, so that would be in the spring of 2012 would be our next round.
And what's your budget for the current year?
So for the current year, it's 1.2 million.
Okay. Thanks. And we'll check back in a minute to hear about what you're projecting beyond that.
Great.
Last year, again, it was about 8.8 million. We never know what we will have to distribute until very near the end of the fiscal year. We always just have to wait for the budget to pass. But we are hoping that it will at least be flat. We have, most of our funds go to support general funds for organizations, and we have a application workshop in December. You can always go on our website to see what the upcoming deadlines are, sfgfta.org.
Actually, the websites are listed in the biographies handout. Oh,
Yes, and also I have handouts that I share.
But repeat it again.
sfgfta.org, so San Francisco Grants for the Arts.org. You can also just Google Grants for the Arts. And applications are due in February. It takes about 6 months for us to process the applications. The staff looks at the applications. We come to do site visits. We come to see any performances that you do. We meet 4 times with our advisory committee that's appointed by the city administrator. One of our advisors is here today, Dan. So if you have any questions or complaints, we we let people know in August whether they've been funded or not. But we're always open to hearing what you have to say and answering any questions. What is coming up next is a small grant round that we do every couple of years. It's called the Voluntary Arts Contribution Fund, and it's for small capital expenditures. That also is on our website. You can look at that. The deadline for that is Halloween, it's October 31st. It's grants from $500 to $5,000. It's mostly for emergency issues. For instance, if you've been cited and and you have a code violation and you need to fix something, like an exit sign, or the second priority is if you need something in your facility to help make the audience's experience better. You can go and look on the website for more information about that. Give me a call. And mainly what we really care about is, are you helping to promote San Francisco by the arts? So you have to be publicly accessible. You have to keep track of how many people that you feel that you're bringing into the city. It has to be publicly advertised. You have to be of a professional level, and that means have maybe some kind of review, or we go do site visits and see what that's about. You can look on our website again and see what priorities are. But we find performing arts organizations and then grades and annual events.
Thanks, Renee. And Julie?
This year, Hewlett Performing Arts Program will give away about $13.3 million. It is by invitation, as our budget and assets decreased significantly from 2008 to 2010. We decreased our portfolio by 40%, and rather than having an open application process, we focused on maintaining support for the organizations that we had a history with. This year, in December, we will introduce a new strategic framework for 2012 through 2017. And this is the first time publicly anyone has seen this chart. So when you came in, this was on the table out front, and this will go up on our website in December, that talks about our priorities moving forward. Our goal builds upon our legacy to ensure continuity and innovation in the performing arts through the creation, performance, and appreciation of exceptional works that enrich the lives of individuals and benefit communities in the Bay Area. We have three components, or three major buckets that we use and prioritize for our grant making. First is continuity engagement, that the Bay Area public engages in a variety of arts experiences, and we look at that as from a variety of traditional and innovative works. Our second priority is arts education. This is new for the foundation. Although we have funded arts education for decades, this is the first time we have pulled it out as its own discrete component. We are seeking that California students have equitable access to multidisciplinary arts education opportunities. So this is statewide, it's multidisciplinary, and includes arts education. We are working closely with our education program at the foundation to identify funding opportunities that intersect both of our program areas and interests. And then our third component is infrastructure, and that's that organizations and artists have the resources to be effective. And that's where you see a lot of our art service organizations, Dancers Group, Theater Bay Area, the local arts councils, local community foundations, the pieces that help the infrastructure work for all of us. So those are our three program components moving forward. Our current
I see a hand up. We're going to take questions once all the panelists have spoken. Thanks.
Our current portfolio maps very well to the new framework, so we don't anticipate exiting major clusters of grants or adding major clusters of grants moving forward in the near future.
Thanks, John. And thanks for unveiling your plan. You saw it, you heard it here first. Francis, do you have any announcements?
I don't, really. One thing I didn't say in the introduction is that the Walter and Elise Haas works primarily in San Francisco and does some grant making in Alameda County, in Berkeley, and Oakland. So that's our geographic scope. We have 4 grant making areas. They are not changing in the coming year. They have not changed in recent years. One is we've had a long-standing focus on arts education, especially programs that are serving kids who have limited opportunities for socioeconomic reasons to study the arts in depth. We have a focus on passing down cultural traditions in recent immigrant communities, and we're not so much interested in outreach to recent immigrant communities, but organizations that are really based in those communities. We have a focus on something called cultural commons, which I think because of the word common, everybody thinks that's the category they fit in. So we have funded 2 kinds of things in that category. One is high-quality free programs. The other one is arts activities that are focused on bringing people together across their differences. It relates some to the work we do in our Jewish Life program area, where we work on building bridges between the Jewish and Muslim communities. And so in Cultural Commons, we've looked at projects that brought together people of Turkish and Armenian descent. We've looked at people across generational differences. So anyway, a number of things fit there, but that's the focus. And then the one thing I'm not going to say so much about today, but I do want to mention because it's important, is the Creative Work Fund, which is the program area where we focus on the creation of new work by artists collaborating with nonprofit organizations. It's different from everything else we do because it has one hard and fast deadline. This year, letter of inquiry, December 2nd. It has 4 funders, so its budget is sort of discrete and apart from the Walter and Elise Haas Fund's arts grant-making budget. We have more money in that category next year because we do have a 4th funder, which is Art Place. We'll have $810,000 to give to 20, 21, maybe 22 projects. Grants are of a pre-arranged size, $10,000 to $40,000. If you get one, you get what you ask for. The Hewlett Foundation, I must acknowledge, is one of our funders, as is the Irvine Foundation. I'm very thankful to them, as well as Art Place. The reason I'm not going to say so much about it, I did bring guidelines, but I have done 6 live workshops and 3 webinars about it. I have 2 more webinars coming up, one on here at 6 p.m. on the 7th of November and one at noon on the 8th of November. And if either of those is inconvenient to you, there's a podcast of a previous webinar that's up on the Creative Work Fund website. And then I'm also doing workshops in Napa and Tracy in the next 2 weeks. So
you can go on tour with that.
yeah, so I've been on tour for the Creative Work Fund, and that's what the guidelines look like. About the Walter and Elise Haas Fund's budget. As I mentioned earlier, I've been pretty lucky that the program budget cuts have been modest. Over the last 3 years, my budget has gone from $2 million to $1.77 million. Looking forward to next year, there are several scenarios being considered by the board. In the worst case scenario, they're cutting the program budget grants area by $1 million, which would mean a $250,000 cut to the arts program. The best case scenario is staying at $1.77 million. I will know by the end of November, and at the moment I don't.
The Community Foundation, we model our funding along the lines of the bigger mission of the foundation, and that is to mobilize resources, act as a catalyst for change, build strong communities, foster civic leadership, and promote philanthropy. So within the arts itself, one of the things that much like my colleagues, the San Francisco Community Foundation also underwent a review of its strategic plan, was basically what it went through, and looked at what had we been funding, what kinds of things had we not looked at, and to be, like I said previously, be more proactive in terms of our grant giving. And so out of that, we came out with the 3 focus areas: focusing, deepening, and measuring our work to address critical issues affecting the most vulnerable in the region to improve the quality of life for all. Social justice is now one of our core values. For those of you who were here, for those of you here who may have remembered that we did have a separate category at one point called social justice. The trustees felt that rather than have it be its own separate kind of outside of the other program areas, that it needed to be woven in as a thread to all the grant making that we give. So now that is one of our core values. And also commitment to closing the gap of inequities in the region. So within that, the arts, if you go to the website, you'll see that the guidelines for arts and culture have not changed that much. They will change much more next year because the arts and culture program officer, John Kalaki, for those of you who met him, he left about the same time all of this was happening. So the trustees felt, well, rather than make those changes with interim personnel, that they would wait for the new PO to actually make that change to bring the arts and culture more in alignment with these core values that were fleshed out in the strategic plan. So now, like I said, if you look at the website, there is at least an introduction are looking at projects and organizations that not only nurture the creativity, artistic creativity, and strengthen arts education, which is also another one of our focus, such as other colleagues here, but to deepen diverse culture participation in order to enrich, develop, and celebrate communities in the 5 county areas. So we're looking at how we can do that at a deeper level, because impact is very important. And part of our strategic plan, one of the goals is to deepen impact both within internally and also the organizations that we fund. So where can we give our money so that in a sense we can also maximize our impact out in the community? And I'm not going to get into specifics about that because we are going to talk about that a little bit later. But I will say that currently right now we did keep the 3 different areas of funding. So we still do core operating support, but we leave that mostly for organizations that have been with us for a while. So if you're a new applicant, don't apply for core operating support because that's not what we're going to be looking for. We would be looking for project support, what project you can introduce us to your organization so we can see how that works out if you do get accepted, and then eventually if you stay with us long enough, and sometimes that's 2-3 years, sometimes it's a little bit longer given the situation with each organization is unique. There's also capacity building support. So how do you want to, in a sense, strengthen your organization either administratively, organizationally, or programmatically? I guess I'll leave it at that, other than to say that when we did have the priority funding initiative started, which included a safety net and a nonprofit transition fund and all of those things that I talked about that were in a sense being proactive in terms of acknowledging the economic downturn, each of our component area budgets, money was removed from that. So I lost half of my funding, but obviously to a good cause, because obviously these are good things to, it was important work that needed to be contributed to that, like I said, priority area. So at this point, I have $1.5 million. Some of that, about 300,000 of it, is actually designated grant funding that is for awards to individual artists in literature, visual arts, and performing arts. So, but the rest of it is part of the responsive cycle.
And just to clarify, so if folks go to the San Francisco Foundation website and look at the arts and culture page, is that plan now final, or is it still a work in progress?
It's still a work in progress.
Okay.
I felt that I needed a year to go through the whole funding cycle, because when I got here on February 1st, it had been the tail end of that first cycle, and I felt that I really needed to go through another cycle, and also because I felt that it would be too difficult of a change, just automatically change everything from one year to the next, and that it would be better to have a transition year to kind of tweak the language and then, like I said, sort of move the guidelines closer to where they're going to be going in the following year.
I know some of you started forecasting where you'll be next year, and that's my next question is around your budget plans and how psychologically, I guess, the board and foundation is thinking about, is it optimistic? And I know some of this is still up for debate. So beyond the number, are you doing anything creative to assist your grantees, like, especially as they struggle with the challenging economy? So are you looking at doing more general operating support or technical assistance or capacity building dollars or other strategies designed to specifically to address what's happening in the economy? And Tere, we'll stick with you, and I know San Francisco Foundation has mentioned the restructuring as one strategy, but for a while you were doing capacity building as well.
Right. We're still doing capacity building at this point, and we will keep it. I think the three different things that I talked about, the core support, general operating, capacity building, project support, that will stay. I think what we're moving towards is in terms of actually trying to help ourselves and you and the grantee is multi-year funding, because I know that has been sporadically offered by the foundation. The situation that we're encountering right now that we need to sort of work out is that because if I give you a multi-year grant, I have to take the whole money out of my current year budget. So in a sense, it lessens the ability to give out more grants. So we're trying to work that out, and we are, as a foundation, committed to figuring out how to do that so it doesn't, like I said, impact negatively that first year of grant making and sort of unstabilize already an unstabilizing situation. So we are working on that. I also am working on trying to figure out how we can also give bigger grants, because we know that even as helpful as a $10,000 to $15,000 grant is, and I know for a lot of arts organizations, it is a major grant and not to be taken lightly. But at the same time, the ability to give bigger grants for longer periods of time is something that we are really looking at, trying to figure out how we can do that within the next year or two, because we also feel like that would be a big benefit and something that we could conceivably do that would have impact as well.
Thanks, Tony. Francis?
Something that we had to stop doing at the economic downturn was multi-year grants, because the trustees were not confident about where the endowment was going to be in future years. So that's been sad for the staff, because we believe that they're helpful in stabilizing, but we're not really making them. Also, I need to kind of put out on the table that overall, the Walter and Elise Haas Fund has this personality of thinking of itself as a mid-sized foundation. It's not going to be your biggest grant. It's going to be somewhere in the mid-range. And we generally support projects, organizations work for up to 3 consecutive years, and then we usually take 2 years off in the arts. And a lot of that has to do with just, there are at least 1,000 potential applicants to our program, and we're able to support about 80 per year. And so it is a way of being able to consider some organizations that are at a crucial point that haven't been considered in the past. Some little thing, we did not create a specific innovation fund. I've done a little bit of, like I've had a couple of grantees who've been in conversation with one another about merging, sharing back office, doing something to help them through a difficult time. And we have, say, added a few $1,000s to program grants to help support that conversation. So we've done, sort of on a case-by-case basis, talking with the applicants a lot. We've tried to be more flexible with how the money is used. Like, it has to be within the program area we're interested in, but not narrowly defined for only buying soap or whatever it is that the project is for, but to be a little more open to general support for programmatic areas. And, something else that I have observed, and this isn't so much a comment on something that we're supporting, but interests me, is I'm noticing a lot of organizations reorganize the way they do their work, their job definitions, their job sharing, rethinking what the responsibilities of the board, not so much the board, but the executive leadership is, and how that burden of that might be divided among several people. And it's been an interesting thing to discuss with our trustees, because I think it's emerging out of newer business models. I don't know if Adobe works in this way of having like more of a horizontal leadership. I still have to talk with our trustees about it a lot, because they kind of want to know where the buck stops. But I think it's an interesting, having been an ED myself, it's an interesting idea to share some of that burden, and I think it's an interesting innovation that is organically coming from the field.
Thanks, Francis. John?
So as the others have talked about their responses to the economic recession, Hewlett reduced its portfolio by 40% across all grant-making programs, so they were all equitably cut. That meant for the performing arts programs that most of our current grantees received reductions from 25 to 50%, and we eliminated about 20% of our total portfolio. So we went from 250 grantees down to about 210 grantees. We also discontinued all of our capital grant making, because those were major grants that we were making with special proceeds that came out of the earnings. So the economic forecast coming from my foundation is equilibrium is the goal for the next 5 years. We're trying as much as possible to avoid quick upturns. as well as, I think the bigger fear is a double dip recession. Hewlett's assets are invested internationally, so the results of the US stock market are as important as the economic health of China, India, and Brazil. So, and not Greece. And so, we have, pretty sophisticated money managers that look at this over the time, and really that this equilibrium is the goal for the next 5 years, is to avoid these economic swings that we've seen happening over the past decade. So our board then will look in mid-November at our budget for 2012. We anticipate that it will be about the same as this year, around $13.5 million. We continue to use our primary approach of general operating support. We have done some organizational effectiveness and capacity building. That's when we notice an organization is at a critical inflection point where we can put some additional dollars on the table to help them get outside expertise to solve a problem that they're facing. It's not for organizations that are in financial crisis.
So can you give some examples of inflection points where dollars have made a difference?
So a couple organizations that we're supporting currently are re-examining their product, their structure, and their leadership. As Francis described, a shared leadership model with their board and their staff and how they divide responsibilities and share responsibilities, particularly like fundraising. So it's not just an executive director's job, but that it's really a shared responsibility that's coordinated through it. And then programmatically, how does that impact, and how do they structure their programs and their audiences? So it's where the organization is taking a leap forward. It's not just an ongoing strategic planning process, but it's one of those evolutionary points for an organization.
And just because this is interesting to a lot of folks among our audiences that think about this a lot, do you see a common point at which those struggles start to happen? Like, do you see a thread there that kind of discussion seems to hit a wall when an organization reaches a certain budget level?
It could be budget size, it could be the growth cycle of the organization, where they are and how old they are. It could be the artistic vision of the organization and how it evolves as the audiences are changing all around us. It tends less to be driven by a financial crisis. So these organizations tend to have some solid financial places from which to move, because if they're in a bad financial place, it's hard to, you're worried about staying alive, not worried about what you could become. And I should mention that while we don't have a separate fund for it, we have provided some money this past few years for organizations to either merge or sunset, particularly organizations that we have had historic relationships with. We recognize that the barriers to creating an arts organization are very small, and the barriers to exiting an organization seem to be very, very huge. So we in particular have tried to help organizations as we're thinking about sunsetting or merging, that we maintain the assets in the community, that we recognize the artistic legacy of the organization and make sure that that is preserved in some way, and that we respectfully acknowledge the work that this organization has done as it sunsets or merges.
Thanks, John. Renee, does Grants for the Arts get involved with capacity building or other creative responses to what's happening in the economy right now?
We do. I want to say that we really have had to revisit our core mission and our core values as the economy has gone up and down. And I would say that one of our strong core values is stability, and really trying to make sure that we can, as much as possible, fulfill our goals, our funding goals for the organizations that we fund already, while leaving some room to take on new groups. And just so you know, our grants are based on an organization's budget size. It's about 15% of the budget of an organization that's $350,000 or less, and about 2.5% is up to $10 million, and then over 10 million, it's a significant percentage, but not that much. It could be 1% or less. Our smallest grant is $5,000. So any organization that's applying to us needs to have a budget of about $35,000. Last year, we had 15 new grantees apply to us, and we were only able to bring on 3. So we have really had to look at what is the best fit, which organizations are the best fit. We've been more flexible with organizations that we fund already. I suspect that we may be looking even at the ones we fund already to see, are they the best fit for our criteria? So this is jumping ahead a little bit, but when you are looking at our criteria on the website or coming to our How to Apply workshops, really think about if you are a best fit and really think about making that argument in an application. Capacity building, yes, we are involved in an initiative called the Creative Capacity Fund with several foundations that started out with just us and not Wallace, San Francisco, no, the San Francisco, the Arts Commission and the San Francisco Foundation. We wanted to build the capacity and the professional development of our grantees. Well, we put it together in a fund, and then it got so popular that it's gone to Los Angeles as well. So it seems to be becoming a statewide scholarship fund, especially for people that are involved in arts organizations or individual artists. There's small grants, $500 to $1,000 to go to a workshop. It's a place like Compass Point, to go to a conference, to hire a career coach, to work with a consultant, and that is run by the Center for Cultural Innovation, CCIarts.org. So I would invite you to check that out. We're also doing more re-granting. So as John was saying, giving money to organizations like Dancers Group, San Francisco Friends of Chamber Music, to be able to have the people who are experts in the field, especially with groups that are really just coming up, emerging organizations, to fund small projects for those groups. And I think that we're going to commit even more to that. We're going to see more of that in the coming years.
So for the Adobe Foundation, really, since the budget comes from Adobe Systems, the success of the company determines how much grantmaking we're able to give. And we've had actually the fortunate situation of being able to increase our budget over the past couple of years. I would say it's not at the rate that we had hoped. I think when everyone was more optimistic. However, the company and the executive leaders have been committed to the foundation, which for corporate social responsibility is a big plus when your leaders believe in the work that you do and also the impact that it's making in the community. We've also had to shift a little bit. So instead of focusing just on providing cash grants, trying to see what else we can leverage as an organization. And so that's when we really partner with the corporation to give in-kind donations of software. We found that that's been really helpful for organizations. And then also to leverage our employee base. So we have over 10,000 employees worldwide, and then engaging our employees in doing volunteer projects, whether it's just a group project, or providing assessment or evaluations of maybe a website or marketing collateral, or we're looking to do more intensive volunteerism through pro bono programs and other initiatives. We really want to engage our employees with the organizations and have them also be investors in the work that they're doing. So we're trying to shift away from just the dollar amount and see a more holistic approach.
And I know many people come to these programs to get some tips beyond what's online on your website. So I'm going to, in the interest of time, smush a couple of questions together that sort of get at those tips. So the first, what tips would you give to those who are new to your foundation or institution about approaching you for support? There's always concern, especially during tight times, that there might not be much left over once you award grants to those in your existing portfolios. So have you managed to preserve some for new organizations? And if so, what advice do you have for those new groups to approaching you? And as you reflect on that advice, I think in particular in these tough times, organizations get afraid about talking about their finances with you because they are struggling. And as many of you have said, you'd like to find strong organizations. So as you reflect on advice for new groups, maybe broaden out a little bit, just how up to everybody in the room, what are you looking for in those conversations? Besides honesty that might get them into trouble. Feedback. And let's see, I'm gonna start with John on this one, actually.
Oh, okay.
Just to shake things up a little.
So, as I mentioned, with the economic recession, we began to focus exclusively on the organizations that we had historically supported and not accepting applications from new grantees. As we move forward in 2012, my fingers are crossed that we may have some space next summer to do a small letter of inquiry process. We are still discussing that with our board, but at this point, we're looking at community-based organizations that serve and are rooted in low-income communities or communities of color. We anticipate putting more details on our website in January about our plans for 2012. And that will align very closely with our new logic model and strategic framework. And then, as my colleague mentioned, we support 17 different regranting intermediaries. So the Creative Work Fund, Gerbode, Zellerbach, Theater Bay Area Cash Program, Dancers Group, Community Foundations, Arts Councils, the Center for Cultural Innovation. Those are all listed on our website. So you can go to our website and look at resources for artists and organizations, and it lists all the places that we give money that you can apply to get a grant. We recognize that many of these regranting partners have expertise within their discipline or within their community, have the capacity to review lots of small applications and proposals from small budget organizations that we would not have the capacity to review at Hewlett. And so we use this as a mechanism for reaching small budget organizations, project support, creative ideas from individual artists or collectives, and preserve as much as possible the funding that we give to those regranting agencies so that you all have access to the Hewlett funds, even though it does not necessarily have our name on it.
And how about tough conversations about finances?
So there is, I think when we start to talk about what's happening at the national level, there's a renewed focus, I think, on financial health and what are the capital needs of an organization to achieve its mission. At Hewlett specifically, I think we were forgiving in 2008, 2009, as the economic recession was hitting hard and fast, and people weren't exactly prepared for that. But now that we're into this economic environment for 3-4 years, we would expect that organizations will have started to adapt to this environment and be a little bit more realistic about their, particularly their revenue projections, and keeping their expenses in line with the revenues that they're able to earn and get contributed to them. So we do look not only at the income statement for each year and what your bottom line is, did you have a surplus or a deficit, but we also look at the balance sheet because we consider that to be the long-term financial health of the organization. So we want to know, are your unrestricted net assets growing over time because you've had lots of surpluses, or are they decreasing over time because you've had accumulated debt year after year after year? And we believe that that's an indicator of your capacity to achieve your mission and your artistic product in the community is having a strong financial position from which to move. We encourage organizations to have a very frank conversation with us about that too. They're never easy conversations to have, of course, but it's better to have a transparent conversation coming out of the gate than to get down the road, a year or two in conversations about grants, and then we pull up your numbers and see, oh, sorry, we can't do it. It feels like we've not used both of our times wisely. So I encourage transparency in your conversation.
And if I heard you correctly, it sounds like when you're having those conversations, you're looking for some kind of plan about how they've adapted, correct?
The plan about what they've done and changed over time, as well as what are the assumptions moving forward. I just talked about Hewlett's assumption is equilibrium is the goal for our assets moving forward. When we get a budget from an organization and it shows their ticket sales are going to grow 25% next year, and their individual fundraising is going to grow 50% next 200% you know, you sort of have to question some of the assumptions that they have. And so that's the place where we start to have a conversation about, you know, are your expenses going to be, have a break on it if you're not able to raise 200% more money from Renee next year? So that we understand what your contingencies are. Of course, in the arts, we're always aspirational. And that's, I think, part of what is so great about our sector is the aspiration that we have. But we also need to know that there's responsibility that's associated with that. And that an organization has the brakes to put on a budget whenever the financial situation doesn't turn out the way they had expected.
So aspiration and discipline.
That's great.
Renee?
I would say that finances have become more transparent anyway, since the Cultural Data Project has come into being, and that's a software that people use to put in their finances. And I know for our organization, you need to fill out the Cultural Data Project in order to apply to us, and I think that's true of most funders here. So, you know, we have the numbers, we see the numbers, and we will compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges, so you won't be compared to the opera symphony or a larger dance company. You will be compared to somewhat of a similar budget size. I will say that if there's a deficit, if there's something, a big change from one year to the other, it's really important to address that, just to explain it. Don't ignore it. Just again, talk to us about it and be honest about it. Write about what that is. Yeah, that's.
How many people are on Cultural Data Project currently? The majority. So there's a lot of research that's coming out of the Cultural Data Project, and even more initiated this upcoming year. So I encourage you to keep your Cultural Data Project profiles current so that your organization is included in this statewide and regional research.
And for those who aren't familiar with it, can you give a quick note version of it?
Sorry, I didn't mean to take us off on a tangent. Website, californiaculturaldata.org, so it's CA, cultural data. Organizations have a standardized way then that they can enter their financial statements, any numeric piece of information that they collect in a standardized way, from attendance to employment of artists to people being served. And then at the end of the profile is a list of about 45 participating funders in the state of California. And as part of the application processes, you can click on one of those funders and your numbers are reformatted into the budget for that funder. So there's a standardized way that we can all look at the numbers. There's also reporting features for you so that you can print out your own reports. You can do comparison reports, so you can have a constellation or a group of peers by budget size, by discipline, by geography that you want to compare your numbers to so you can see those. Really effective grant writers have been using that. So if someone came to me and said, we have one development staff person, our peer average on CDP has 3 development staff people. Our goal is to increase fundraising, and we recognize we have to increase staff to do that, and we're below what our peers are doing. And they use it as that's building their case.
And that's a great point because consultants and development staff come to us all the time looking for those metrics because they all suspect they're understaffed. So now you have a
now
source
you
where
have
you can
comparisons.
prove
And
it.
it's very simple to run these comparison reports. I mean, they've really made it user-friendly.
And just at Adobe, you said it's largely by invitation only. So what advice do you have for new groups? And then also any advice about the finance conversation?
So for us, because it's invitation only, we really value the relationships that we do have. And so kind of once you become a grantee, you become part of the family. But we see that there's like a courtship process. I think for us, it is a relationship, and we want to invest heavily in the organizations that we do support. And I think it is about transparency on both sides. So it's, you know, the organization being honest about their financial situation, what their vision is, where they want to go, and also an opportunity for the Adobe Foundation to be transparent about what our goals are, what's driving us, the limitations for phase 5. We've found that when we've been able to have frank conversations that while we've said no, potentially in a previous year, we've been able to work with work through other rounds of applications and then come up with a proposal that was a lot stronger, and then kind of there was more sustainability to support for that organization as opposed to that initial year where it wouldn't have been as successful moving forward.
Francis, you have written a book as well where you advise people on some of these issues. So,
With my husband, co-authored the nonprofit Kick for Dummies. I think that people have covered the financial question well. I just say that it's a concern when organizations have deficits. Having been there myself, I know that when your deficit gets to be like 10% of your budget, you're spending time going to PG&E to pay them in person, and that's not a great use of your time. So that is a concern, but the deeper concern is that you understand your financial situation. And a lot of folks did not jump into running an arts organization because they loved talking to auditors and doing bookkeeping. But I highly recommend using professional development resources to get to the point where you really have your arms around it and can talk about it. I have to say, it strikes me as insane what all the big budget organizations are doing. Let's just say this, they're all growing their endowments. I mean, didn't they all learn in the big fall off that we just had, that when their endowments went underwater, that was a horrible, horrible position to be in? And so, but that does seem to be a more known development strategy than raising working capital, which would be so much better for them at this moment in time. So it's just a thought. I think a lot of people think endowment is going to save them, and in fact, we've just had a really good demonstration that more flexible money that's been set aside is so much better. And then I just wanted to say something that is really a tangent, but I want to get it out there. A lot of people are responding to the economic downturn in part by taking salaried staff and making them independent contractors. And the Attorney General's office is looking for you. And I just have a horror story to share, and that a good friend who runs a dance company was paying her dancers as independent contractors. I bet a lot of you do that. But because they were required to show up for rehearsal at designated hours, they were fined thousands of dollars. So be very careful if that's a choice that you're making to control your expenditures. It can be a dangerous one, so be very cautious.
And how about just advice for those new to you?
Oh, advice for those new to us. We do, just looking at the most recent quarter, we have made grants to a few people who are new grantees. They tend to be those who can demonstrate that they really can demonstrate that they're serving a low-income population, be that students in school or out of school, or adults, and or those that are really rooted in recent immigrant communities. And a lot of organizations are doing programs that ostensibly are serving low-income people, but they don't know it. They haven't collected information about it. And you would be in a much stronger position if you actually knew who was coming to your program. So,
I wanted to add something to the whole financial discussion, and that is that all of us talk to each other. So that's another thing you should be aware of, that I see some budget kinds of questions and I see, oh, Phillips funding, or Phillips funding. I'll call them up and say, well, so how's it going at your end? Are you getting the same story as I am? And I have some questions and you've known them longer, or you have a multi-year grant with them. And so I think you need to be honest so that, and tell us all the same story. Because we will find out, and obviously that doesn't fare well. So just so you know that. I mean, maybe a lot of you are already aware of that, but just in case you're not. The other thing, yes, exactly. And I think it's because not only, I think it's part of, I mean, we take it as part of our due diligence and as part of our process. When your application comes in, even if I don't have a chance to do it at the time I'm reading it, between the time it actually gets approved by our board of trustees, there will be a call if there are some questions. So I think, we take that not only as just sort of the questions are raised, but we do have a due diligence process that we try to at least check in with if not site visit, the organizations that we're funding, just so that because even though we're a community foundation and we don't have maybe the same kinds of regulations or requirements as a government funder or a family foundation, we do have auditors that look at our process, that oversee all community foundations, and not only audit us in terms of our finances and being able to track that dollar to where it went, and maybe not necessarily exactly how it got spent, but that at least the organization was still doing programming, if it was a general operating support grant, things like that. And then we also get audited in terms of how are we monitoring, so also the processes and procedures that we have internally as well. So we take that very seriously. The other thing I was going to say is that I think it's very important for organizations at this point to have quarterly budget reviews with their board, and that it shouldn't be assumed that because your director is saying, oh, things are great, you don't need to see the balance statement, or you don't need to see here's the budget every year, and that's all you see is that. Be very wary about because that is not a good thing to do, especially right now when things change, and that, the funding projections that you make, are not going to maybe bear out. And so at least quarterly, make sure that if you're the director, that you're reporting to your board, and if you're a board member here, to make sure your director is being honest with you about what's going on with your organization, and that there should be at least an annual review of your programming. That when you are putting together your budget for the next year, realizing that you're going to really have to look carefully about, am I going to do every program just because I was able to do it last year, and either whether you ran a deficit or not. I think this is the time to really start looking at what is important, who are you trying to serve, what is the impact, and looking at those programs that, maybe there are a few programs that were really popular or that came from the board because there was an interest there, but you don't have the infrastructure to keep it going, or the funding is not there, to really look at what is the core mission of your organization, and are you able to do it in the next year and maybe going forward, and what is really important about what you do, that no matter what, it's going to happen. And then if you can do something else because you are able to get another grant for something, then that's great, but what is really your core programming? Because I think that's going to help you in the future in terms of determining, how you do your priority, because a budget is just that. It's the priorities that you have undertaken to do for either that next year or the next 2 years. It's a 2-year budget. So I think that's really important as far as looking forward. And obviously, once you do that, I think it does come across to the funders, because we could look at budgets and say, this is really something that they've been doing forever, and this is really something that's important to them. And this other thing, it looks like they just went after the money because it has really nothing to do with their mission. And that kind of raises flags, because then it's like, well, why are they doing that? Is it going to be sustainable over the next year? And especially for a general operating grant, those kinds of issues become very important.
And you had mentioned budget cuts of your portfolio, as well as looking at funding and supporting existing organizations. So what advice do you have for those new to you? Because that doesn't sound like it bodes well for those that are new to you.
Well, I think, and I think it's true of all of us. I mean, right now it's a very hard time, and the resources that we have are very much tied to the organizations that we're supporting. But that's not to say that because we are a responsive grant cycle, we're we're not encouraging. I mean,
You're trying to have a mix?
Well, we're trying to be open to at least entertaining the possibility of being able to have more organizations, apply to us and get funded. Where we're going with the new guidelines in terms of being able to be more in alignment with the foundation is we want to be able to be a good source for what we're calling our anchor institutions. And for us, that means organizations anchored in specific neighborhoods and communities that are really serving the people that they represent. So we're looking for organizations that are not doing outreach, one ethnic community going to another ethnic community and saying, this is what art is, this is how you do it, and then not seeing themselves reflected. That we really want to see how can we support organizations that are part of the community, since we're a community foundation, and how can those services be done in such a way that it's done more in-depth locally and by persons who are representative of the communities that are participating. So I think going forward, that's is going to change in terms of the organizations that will be coming to us and being competitive, because it's always a very competitive kind of situation anyway, and even more so right now because funding situation being what it is. But we felt that given where the community is going in terms of demographics, and as I said before, income levels and things like that, that it's really important for us to have an impact, and that's where we feel we can make the most impact.
Quickly, Grants for the Arts has 2 public meetings a year, and I would encourage you, if you're interested in trying to come to those, that's a wonderful way to approach us and see what's going on and see the other organizations that are on our docket. We have one coming up on November 1st from 2 to 4 at Z-Space, and we're going to talk about leadership transition, emerging leadership. Fall ones have a theme. The spring one in April is when organizations who are applying, have applied, can talk about what they're doing and introduce themselves to our advisory committee and the staff, and that happens in April.
I just have one final question, and I think I'm going to pick on and congratulate John because it has to do with Grantmakers of the Arts National Conference, which met here last week, and John was the chair locally of the event. So congratulations, I hear the event went very well. It was an event for grantmakers only to discuss arts and funding for the arts. The theme was embracing the velocity of change. So I just want to invite you to reflect on any goings on there that our audience would benefit from knowing about, that indicates where the field is moving, overall directions nationally, or things you saw regionally. And I know there was a report that generated a lot of buzz about support for community and the arts and social change. So pick anything that you think jumps out at you.
Okay. So Grantmakers in the Arts is a national organization for funders, like those of us sitting at the table. We convene once a year in different cities around the U.S. on a national conference, and this year Francis and I co-chaired, along with Ted Russell from Irvine and Diane Sanchez from the East Bay Community Foundation, a conference here in San Francisco, San Jose, and Oakland. We took it Bay Area. We had 360 funders from across the U.S. that represent about $1.2 billion of arts grant making. The themes of the conference were technology and innovation, arts and social justice, and then rapidly changing demographics. And we thought those 3 themes were particularly amplified here in the Bay Area. And so that's why we really dove in deep on those. There were more than 40 presentations and workshop sessions that funders do for each other, as well as bringing in outside expertise. We had a demographer here talking about how the demographics in California and the Bay Area have changed very rapidly, and how we are sort of the bellwether for the U.S. In the long term. And many of the challenges that we faced here over the last 20 years, the rest of the U.S. is just starting to understand what demographic change may mean to them. Not just racial ethnic demographics, but age demographics, income disparities. There was a report released by the National Committee of Responsive Philanthropy. I don't know the name of the report, I'm sorry to say.
I just know it's Holly Sidford.
Holly Sidford was the author. And if you go to the National Committee for Responsive Philanthropy, it's the front thing on their website. They've been doing a series of reports on race and philanthropy, and on different sectors in the nonprofit fields, and arts was the one that they chose to do this year. It did raise a lot of eyebrows. There were some really interesting statistics that got picked up by Washington Post, LA Times, Huffington Post. I think the one that sort of caught everyone's eye was 55% of foundation funding goes to 2% of the very large elite organizations whose primary audience is white and affluent. And that makes funders look very hard at their practices, and it makes funders look very diligently as to who is benefiting from the support. And there has been a call from this organization, NCRP, that there should be more equitable funding, particularly for community-based organizations and culturally specific organizations recognizing the rapidly changing demographics. And I will say that many Bay Area funders were highlighted in this report as leaders of change. And so I'm very proud to say that while there is a little bit of finger wagging in the report, there's also some examples of funders that are trying to be responsive to these changes and to be proactive in addressing them.
Thanks, John. And Frances, as co-chair, do you have other reflections to add? And congratulations to you.
Well, thank you. There are a couple of things that jumped out at me based on sessions I went to. One was excitement around the arts education field, that in the education field there's a conversation now about mastery in education, that young people feel better about themselves, accomplish more when they're challenged to really learn something with some sort of depth and diligence. And in fact, arts education is a place where people see that kind of mastery, that arts education might be pointing to where education ought to go. Sort of like, wow, maybe we're not enrichment, we're actually learning. It's so cool. So that's exciting. And also something that might sound so mundane, but I ended up being in a lot of sessions about it, is the documentation of artwork. How, within museum context, how people who are responsible for collections and documentation are suddenly in the middle of education, public presentation, how the public interacts with the work, because we're all expecting more broader opportunities to experience the art in new ways. And so suddenly something that used to be down in the basement is moving upstairs. And then things like, if you're an artist, take your videotapes out of plastic bags, they're causing them to deteriorate. Take them out of the attic where they're damp. That there are a lot of artists whose important legacies are not being cared for or kept. Having it on your hard drive, how many of us have had a hard drive crash? It's just like, there are some very basic things that all of us need to be thinking about to protect the history of our work and the meaning of our work as organizations and as individual artists. And there were some very interesting kind of pragmatic sessions about that being a part of the velocity of change, is protecting the past.
I think for me, one of the important things that came out of, and especially I think because of the foundations, we're looking at, like I said, internally how we can be more effective and impactful. Also looking how we can work cross-sector. So how can, and arts education is obviously one that it's been happening and it's not such a leap. But I felt very excited because one of the things that we had talked about there at the foundation was how could the arts, and I'm really pushing this, of course, is how can the arts be involved in health? How can it be involved in economic development? Certainly in environment. And there's already things that have happened that are out there, but how can we as funders, in a sense, promote it and also be more innovative about how to make it happen? And so I think for me, that's part of the new normal, is how can we get the arts to become more as part of what is the role of arts in society itself, so that we're not sort of segregated off to the side and then easily to lop off, which happens a lot, especially as we've seen it in the schools and in government funding and the decreases. That I think for us, the opportunity is how can that new normal, in a sense, like I said, how can we work more cooperatively, be more collaboratively work together to make sure that the arts aren't sort of this kind of separate thing that only gets enrichment or, sort of an add-on, it's a frill, because I think that is really where our challenge is how do we do that so that we can make sure that the arts are part of all of that and then have a more rightful place in our society, because I think that's what is really important at this point.
Engagement was extremely important, and people are not going to support something that they don't know about, they're not engaged in. So if you are an arts administrator, artist, I encourage you to continue to do your own art and to make a way for others to do it. I encourage you all to continue to dance, sing, laugh, floss, and travel.
Love that. Jessamine, from the
speaking to the topic of change, I find that being at a tech company, change happens very quickly for us. And as a result, our foundation has to be, I think, operate very rapidly. And so for us, we found that, especially in the arts and creativity focus area, that we've been able to have more success with smaller grassroots organizations that are a little more nimble. We found that they are a better fit. They can, a lot of what we're trying to achieve is built into their mission already. And so that has been a real success area for us, as opposed to the larger institutions where it's been a bit more of a challenge.
I'd like to let you in on the conversation now, and just the usual ground rules apply. We want to make sure that you're asking a question that benefits everybody in the room, so anything that's specific and requires a lot of setup should be saved for outside the scope of this conversation. But we do want to know who's asking the question, so just state your name and the organization that you're with. And because we are streaming, we are asking people to come up here. So let me see, show of hands, and then when I select you, you'll let us know if the question is for the panel as a whole or a specific panelist. Let's see, I'm going to start from this side of the room and move around, so go ahead and step up to the podium. And if folks just want to line up behind her, try to do as much lightning round as we can. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm Michelle Rapkin with the Arts Research Center at UC Berkeley. And Francis, you mentioned the Art Place funding, which is a really interesting new initiative. And one of the speakers at last week's panel mentioned this creative placemaking and wondered whether it's kind of a hot, trendy thing that's happening this year or whether it'll be a sustainable thing moving forward. So I was wondering if all of you could speak to creative placemaking and how you see that related to your funding, your initiative.
Because I mentioned it, I'll jump in first and let everybody else. Art Place is a large national initiative, pooled fund of $11.2 million, and they're considering letters of inquiry that are due on the 15th of November. And in the first round of funding, the word was put out to a bunch of potential applicants, and then we were screened at a letter of inquiry stage and then invited to do proposals. And so I was really pleased and delighted to be approached about it, and I have no idea whether the Creative Work Fund will continue to get money from Art Place. My belief about it, and others on the panel may have other thoughts, but that it's a very smart strategy for the National Endowment for the Arts to be able to have this way of talking about the arts that gives them a place in the national conversation about community improvement and job development. And everybody who got Art Place grants, our work is being evaluated, not by us, but by Art Place, based on things like cell phone use and neighborhood demographic change and sort of big picture, what they call vibrancy indicators of how neighborhoods may be improved and revitalized by infusing the arts. In the case of the Creative Work Fund, we're able to make 4 more grants. So we've never had a thematic focus for our grants before, but 4 of them will have a creative placemaking theme. And because they're relatively small, the average Art Place grants in the first round were, I think, $375,000, and ours are $40,000. So we're thinking of the kinds of projects where people are starting an investigation of a particular place, or have like something sort of clear and specific that they want to raise about a neighborhood or a location. Also, we are encouraged to spend our Art Place money in the counties the Creative Work Fund works in that are underserved by philanthropy. So I can tell you that it's easier to say which counties those are not. They are not San Francisco, Alameda, Marin, San Mateo, or Santa Clara. But people working in Solano, San Benito, Monterey, those sorts of places. Don't know if it's a trend. I think it's a really interesting strategy.
Hi, my name is Kerry Curtis. I've recently joined the board of Cantare Con Vivo, which is a musical organization. And my question has to do with boards, and it's for the whole panel. And when you're looking at a grant application, what are you looking for when you look at the board? And what are some positive signs and what are some, danger signs when you're looking at a board?
One of the things that I look at is the board contributing to the organization, and what percentage are they contributing? I know different boards have different resources, but they should be contributing something. And if they're not contributing much, then that should be spoken to, at least talked about in terms of how much they're participating in the program and what they're contributing. I also look at the number. The board, I think an organization that has a board of only 3 people, 4 people, it's not so sustainable. I look at the possible ethnicity of a board. Does it represent the community that the organization is based in? Does it represent the kind of work that the organization is doing?
I'll add one more quick layer. We have 5 selection criteria at Hewlett. They're published on our website, but one of those 5 is leadership. And in leadership, we look at board leadership, staff leadership, artistic leadership, and strategic plan. Because the plan links those 3 bodies of workers together. And so when a board, very much, some of the criteria that Renee just mentioned, but we try to take leadership as a whole to understand how that moves the organization forward and do they have a plan for where they're going.
Sometimes, sometimes all the board members have the same last name as the ED, and that's usually a red flag. And a lot of, if your scope is not national, but a lot of people are from outside the area, it makes me wonder how actively are you meeting, and, it's possible you've been a very good national board, I'm not, But sometimes if I have concerns about the level of involvement or the degree of expertise of the board of directors, I contact the ED and tell them I want to talk to a board member, and I usually ask to speak to either the treasurer or the president. And I ask the person about their aspirations for where they want the board to be in 5 years, and sort of curious to know about the board being reflective about the quality of its own work. And it's interesting how often people haven't thought about it. And it's also revealing when I ask the board about their involvement in fundraising and they say, well, our executive director is really good at that. So, are they taking their responsibility seriously? And, they don't have to have deep pockets to do a really good job.
Can I ask just a quick follow-up?
Let me just see if anybody
Okay.
else has comments. Oh, we covered it, okay. And what's the quick follow-up?
Well, in some arts organizations, the board members are the artists in that community. And so, there's a sense that the board should include some outsiders who are not, singers or dancers or musicians or whatever. How important is that to have a board that is more than just, if it's San Francisco women's artists, if it's not just women's artists on the board, that kind of thing?
I think it is very important to have a diversity on the board in terms of expertise, because the treasurer should know what they're looking at. If it's a balance statement or a budget, or be able to, in a sense, because they're trusted by the rest of the board members to be able to, in a sense, take care of that and interpret it and be able to at least alert them if there's any concerns. So you definitely want, someone, especially in that position. And then also, if the board is going to be more proactive in terms of helping to support the organization, you have professional persons that may have access to more funds or know other people to be able to bring, a sense of checks and balances on the board about whether, something is feasible or not when they're making decisions. So you don't want to have just sort of the same kind of perspective on the board, because you do need those checks and balances.
I'm guessing you all agree with that.
Thank you very much.
Next question, and then we're going to take one question that I understand we have coming through the Twitterverse. So Natasha, if you could come up so we all hear you. I know you'll love that.
My name is James Kavanaugh, and I'm not representing a particular group, but I've been more or less working on nonprofit John, in your closing remarks, you said something that I keep bumping up against. You said that this organization that gathered here, the Grantmakers group, came because it's in Northern California, because the issues that we're dealing with here are ahead of the need for that in other places in the country, right? Things like emissions aids, and cultural diversity, and technology developments. I think we all believe that. I think many of us who weren't born here came here because we see it as an avant. It is out on the edge. But if we leave our zip codes, it's considered kind of snooty to say that. I mean, you know, you think it's so special or something. But the fact is, this could be a real powerful way of developing a proposal that we are seeking national funding for. Who is writing about this? Where is the support I can gather so that I can say work down here has a rippling effect that may be greater than in other areas of the country?
That's a really good question, and it's not a simple answer, and I bet everyone here would give a different answer to it. But I think that if you have tangible results of how your programs have replicated or have been impacting elsewhere, or how the models that you're developing or the work that you're doing is being adapted by other folks, you should always highlight that. And I guess that's the simple answer that I have for it. There are a number of national funders that are working on new frameworks and new grant programs as we speak, and that you will hear about in the Bay Area in the next several months. Kresge Foundation has changed its strategy from bricks and mortar to more capitalization orientation. Irvine Foundation is just announcing its new strategy along with its new grant-making programs. Duke Foundation will be announcing something very soon as well. So you see that there are national funders that are looking at the Bay Area as one of the leading regions of the state and of the nation, and investing resources here to take our knowledge more broadly.
How do we know they're looking at us?
When they put it up on their website and said there's a grants program now available for the Bay Area. And we've been working hard to get them here.
That's one of the reasons we work so hard.
So there's an aspect of networking with your regional donors to get those insights, it sounds like.
In the same way that Hewlett works with like a community foundation, because they know the local, the national funder will come to a regional funder and ask what's happening in your region. So it's a way that you can aggregate expertise at different geographic levels.
And we're going to take that other question, but I invite you to continue the conversation after.
Great question.
So Natasha, what's happening on Twitter?
Hi, lots actually. I've been having a conversation with backup S who might be in this room. Hi. We've had a lot of really great questions during the panel, so I'm going to pose one of them to our panelists, unless I'll spare you. Okay. So the question from FactFS is organizations that provide core operation support like Hewlett Foundation. I think because you guys have an ad mentioned in here, they mentioned you directly. They prioritize organizations they've already worked with, but how can new organizations break in?
So revisit
Did I ask
that.
right? Thank you. No
Yeah.
worries.
Most of our work through re-granting intermediary partners is where we see new organizations coming to get Hewlett funding, but not directly from us. And then in 2012, if we introduce a letter of inquiry process, that will be open for anyone that meets the criteria to send us information.
And I think others addressed that already, but anything to add about new groups?
Grants for the arts, you can apply, but it's open. But I would say that it takes a lot of work to apply, so it's best to really check and see if you meet the criteria and if you're a good fit for the criteria.
Same for us.
And does it help for new groups because they are new to you to call you up? And I'd hate to say that in a room full of people, but in essence, many of you have alluded to the relationship building.
Sure, they can call, but I would like them to be informed before they call. So I would suggest looking at the website, coming to a community meeting, But yes, we do take phone calls, but please do the homework first.
I prefer emails only because then I can check if they have a website, and then emails also tend to sort of force the person to actually articulate a little bit more information to be able to determine whether they have done their homework or not. And like I said, it does give me a time to check website to see if they are a good fit, just by getting more information that way before I respond.
I actually prefer to talk to people on the telephone over email. I think it's just personal style. And yes, check the website in advance. And I'm happy to meet with people. I have peaks and valleys in my work life. Something that, a part of being a program officer, I spend 30 to 50% of my time writing. And so every grant proposal you're writing, I'm spending like 3 times that much time on writing about it. And so there just are, I'm often under internal deadlines and can't meet with people, but I'm also open to it. It's kind of helpful for me to see something in writing first to make the conversation richer. But, yeah.
My name is Carl Brush. I'm representing Musically Minded and New Music School in Oakland. And my question is for the two of you who accept applications by invitation only, although you're going to change that in 2012. How does one go about procuring such an invitation?
So for us, we're actually focused on visual and multimedia arts. So we're not in the performing arts space, just to put that out there as well. But for us, it's about reaching out and having a conversation and realizing that it usually is done over email for us with Adobe.
Because everything is electronic with Adobe.
Right, and we don't have files and we move around.
So you accept emails asking for invitations, is that what you're saying?
So I'll accept emails that describe the organization, recognizing that we aren't soliciting information. A lot of
So it's like an email of introduction.
Right, an email of introduction, and I think it's really highlighting that for us, we're very specific about where we can provide support, especially from a geography perspective, because it's based on where we have offices. So it is doing that research beforehand, and oftentimes I find that people who are just sending those general inquiries fall outside of them right away. And so it is doing that research to make sure that when you are making contact, that there is a possible connection that can happen.
Thank you.
I would add also selectively include us on key information that you send out. So you can add us to your email list so that when your annual report comes out, we get a copy of that. Or if you have a special event that occurs once a year, we get an invitation to attend that. Or, whatever those few key moments are each year where your organization is, in the spotlight, and you would love to have somebody take a look at it. I would discourage you from adding us to your general email list, where I get an email once a day that asks for volunteers for the kids' art show. Because I tend to just go through and delete those every morning right off the bat. But look for those, special invitations that are not necessarily mass marketing, where I can be responsive and learn about your organizations.
Hi, I'm Georgia Webb. I'm with the Oakland Public Conservatory of Music. And I was struck, as probably many of us, by the 55% number. And I'm wondering if the applications are proportionate to the outcomes. Is that, does the number of applications equate to the number of grantees, or if there's some kind of correlation between the two? And Tere, you made a statement about growing from within, or coming from within, sort of indigenous development of grantees. And I was thinking also about approaches to these organizations, since many of them will probably be new if we were to in any way increase those numbers. So a lot of that is going on in my head right now, and I'm trying to figure out were there any action items that came out of the conference last week, or any thoughts you have on how we move on changing that percentage, that picture.
And can I talk a little bit about the data issue too?
Sure.
Because this came up in a panel we had last week as well, and Ben Cameron from the Doris Duke Foundation pointed out that in his foundation's instance, they make a grant to Dance USA that is a re-grantor that then grants those dollars to community groups around the country. But because their grant is to the intermediary, it doesn't get counted in things like this report usually, because the data is that that's for general operating support of this large institution, when in reality those dollars are reaching many communities. So there's a data issue there. And then he also pointed out that because community groups often are small budget, they're limited by how much they can get from one funder before it tips them over into being a private foundation, because you can only you have to pass the public support test as a nonprofit, and you might tip yourself into looking like a private foundation if you get one very large grant from a private foundation. So that limits foundations in many ways for making large grants to smaller groups. So those are a couple of the data issues I wanted to bring up, and like the rest of the panel reflect.
And we need to think about who are those top 2% organizations. So that's the Kennedy Center, the Met in New York, maybe SF MoMA here locally. Very, very large budget organizations. Many of them are doing capital endowment campaigns right now. So when the Fishers give a $100 million grant to SF MoMA, $250 million grant, sorry. That's counted in this overall pool, right? And so that makes it seem as if just those top 2% are getting that major grant, and if it wasn't for that capital grant, that $250 million could potentially be redistributed to smaller budget organizations or individual artists. So there's some of the methodology in this is questionable, and we're trying to figure out how, as funders, we can code it to show the diversity of what we're funding. And then your question about the applicant pool, I think that every funder that I know is striving for a diverse applicant pool and for awarding grants that represent the diversity of the community. And I think you've got some of the leaders right here, frankly, at the table. And that other funders now are watching how we have been addressing this. Grant makers in the arts will continue to have a conversation over the next year around race and philanthropy, and we'll then present more information at the conference next year in Miami, including a series of recommendations on how funders can look at structural racism within their grants programs, their staffing, their assumptions, and look at how they try to be a little bit more equitable from these historic patterns. Okay?
Question.
It is a very tough question, and not a two questions.
And around action items, I should also mention that the Foundation Center, our data and research department, has been engaged in issuing reports that are free and available on our website about diversity and philanthropy. And so we've been tackling this, and a lot of the issues do relate to how the grants are coded, as John just mentioned. And so we're trying to shape our team to look at taxonomy so that we can better capture the data, because we're the place where they come to get these statistics. So we want to make sure that we have the most accurate data that we can gather, but it is tricky.
Well, our apologies for having having the courage to face it and deal with it. Very realistically, as we were talking about realistic deficits, there are some realistic deficits in this whole model.
Well, another thing you might find is interesting is our glasspockets.org effort. That's another Foundation Center effort that's around collecting the documentation on philanthropy, and it's really focused on encouraging transparency, and we look at things like diversity indicators that are made available on foundation websites. So you can see which foundations on their websites are posting information about the diversity of their staff and the diversity of their grant making.
I think one important piece too, and I want to congratulate Tere for the San Francisco Foundation, is that it's important to continue the diversity and to increase the diversity of people in philanthropy. And the San Francisco Foundation for many years has had a multicultural fellowship program. 25 years. Yeah, it's where I cut my teeth, actually. Yes, as a fellow. And I'm kind of saddened that that kind of program hasn't spread to more foundations. We thought that it would. But I did notice at this conference that the diversity is creeping up in the foundation world. I was kind of shocked at how white male it was.
one final question, and then we'll wrap up.
Hello, my name is Thomas Simpson, and I represent the group Afro Solo. And this follows up on the idea of race and philanthropy. The idea in terms of demographics, in particular the African-American community here in San Francisco seems to be going down percentage-wise. What impact does or will that have on funding organizations such as mine that is specifically Afro-centric? Or is the recommendation that we become less so?
Great question.
That's a great question.
That's the answer.
Well, I don't have the answer, but a couple thoughts. One is, San Francisco has some excellent African-American performing arts and visual arts organizations, although I think of the performing arts as really being a leader with African-American artists from your organization, Cultural Odyssey, Maureen Hansberry, there's just Alonzo King, there's really some amazing leaders in this community. People, I mean, this is like the art place mantra, which is not mine, but it's interesting, which is that people choose to live in places if they can be involved in a rich cultural life in those places. And I think it is sad to see the declining numbers of African Americans in San Francisco, and keeping strong African American organizations here is a way to retain that population. So, on one hand, I'm looking at who are, we've made a grant to the Mongolian community, the Tibetan community, sort of relatively new emerging groups in the region. At least in my mind, we're not turning our backs on the long-time Cantonese-speaking Chinese population, the African-American population, the Filipino population, the other groups that are really have for a long time been important to the fabric of San Francisco. It's a great, I mean, the city is becoming more and more diverse overall,
I was listening to a radio show yesterday about black flight from the Bayview Hunters Point region, and that what had historically been an African-American neighborhood is now almost split, half and half Latino and African-American. I didn't even realize that in our own neighborhood, how that quickly is changing. Race and ethnicity is not used as a single determinant at Hewlett, but is used as a constellation of diversity factors, including age, geography, income level, identity, so gay, straight, or religious affiliation, etc. So we look at sort of a spectrum of diversity factors when we're looking at audience and product for arts organizations and who they're trying to reach. And I think Francis has really addressed what we see as one of the challenges is the rapidly changing demographics, making certain that we have a little bit of everything in our portfolio to represent the fabric of our communities.
And, we've supported Afro Solo for a long time. It is an underlying, we are absolutely committed to diversity of all sorts. And so, an African-American arts organization is very important to us. We have to look at that along with the others. One of the things that I think is interesting to have a conversation about is what do African-American organizations here do in terms of audience development? What your dilemma is, and to hear from you at some point about what you do. Do you, reach out to other African more? Do you go find black folks wherever they flew to? Where did they go? And then even Oakland, I'm like, where's everybody going? Bring them in as well. So I think it's an interesting dialogue to have.
We're doing it to a certain extent because of the neighborhood approach that we're taking. Like I said, those anchor institutions, and those anchor institutions can be as a facility, as you have in Western Addition, where several companies reside in one building, the cultural center, or in Bayview Hunters Point, the Bayview Opera House, and other institutions there. But I think what we've done also, and this is another program that the arts are part of, is the mini grants and the faith-based initiatives, where we actually then support the churches and the long as they don't try to, in a sense, promote the religious part of it, that the fact that they can do cultural and artistic-based activities, we give them small grants to do that, and I think that's sort of our way too to kind of help shore up those communities in another way, as opposed to just doing the arts organizations directly.
Jess, I know you don't fund the performing arts, but do you have any closing remarks you'd like to make?
Wrap it all up.
So we just hope.
Well, I think, if anything, there's just been a lot of variety, and there's a lot of unique situations for each of our foundations and then for your organizations. I think that that's taking into account how there isn't just a one answer, and there isn't just one silver bullet that, oh, just get this statistic book and then you can get every funding in the world and all of us can do it. And so I think it is just recognizing that and highlighting the uniqueness of your organization and finding out where it plugs in with a funding priority for ours.
Thank you. And do any of the other panelists have any closing remarks that they want to make?
Well, we found that the organizations that have strong leadership, have good connection with their audiences, have diverse funding sources, and have a strong mission and stick to the mission are doing okay. So those are things that you need to ask yourself.
Thanks. None of these programs would be possible without the grant makers being willing to volunteer to come and share their insights. So please help me in thanking our panelists. And I apologize for running over, and I want to be respectful of the time of our panel, but do some of you still have time to stay so people can come up and do a meet and greet?
About 10 minutes.
I actually have an appointment at 1 with a potential grantee, so I think I better go back.
So start moving.
Okay. So do you want me to stop now or hold on for a little bit?
Yeah, we can stop.
You can stop?
Totally, yeah.